Hey everyone, my name is Dr. Dolores Tarver. I'm a licensed psychologist here in Georgia, and it is time for the TT Time with Dr. Tarver is a wellness-based podcast. It is not intended to be a substitute for a relationship with a licensed mental health provider. Welcome to the second week in October. Last week we discussed breast cancer Awareness Month, and this week we're going to be discussing domestic violence awareness and prevention. I think it's fitting in light of everything that is going on right now in the news with Sean Combs. And so, without further ado, let's get into it. Pinned and groomed risk factors for intimate partner violence. I like to always start off with some definitions and giving some context and background because I don't want to assume that everybody understands what intimate partner violence is. You'll also hear the term domestic violence used for it. But typically, this is abuse that is going to occur from people that we love and care about, hence the intimate part of it. This connected relationships we have to people. It could be parents, it could be friends, it could be people that we're in dating relationships with. It could be your coworkers who you have close relationships with. And so we want to talk a little bit about the different types. And yes, there are different types. And a lot of times people, which I think is one of the reasons why our risk factors are a little bit higher to be in relationships where people are engaging in some type of violence or abuse toward us, is because we don't necessarily look at it as such. There's financial abuse. Diddy is absolutely, based on the allegations, engaging in behaviors like this, per the reports, where you're withholding resources from people. You are requiring that they do certain things in order to be able to get paid. You're not allowing people to have access to their financial resources. You are, sometimes people will run up debt in a person's name. They will purchase things and say, "Oh, I'm gifting this to you, this is yours," but then they turn around and say, "No, you're responsible for this payment," and you weren't in a position to make that payment, nor did you want to take on that, something that they presented as a gift, but not that you're responsible for it. And this financial abuse, what does it do? It keeps a person stuck. So you know you're in a contract, you know that you don't have the capacity to be able to get out of this contract because you signed some legal paperwork. You may not even be in a financial situation to be able to get an attorney to help you. And you're also likely in a situation where you're requiring, or you're required to have this person. They may be a co-signer for you. You may be sharing a household with them, and so you can't necessarily leave and live out on your own. You may be in a situation where you have a mortgage with this person, and so you know that if they leave and they don't pay the mortgage, that's going to put your credit in a situation, and then you won't be able to get additional housing. And so a lot of times that manipulation is very easy for people to keep a person stuck in because you really don't feel like you have other resources. And sometimes people are just not in a position where they have friends or family that is going to be able to help them financially. Sometimes it's just us and we're trying to navigate all of those things. And other times people are embarrassed and they don't want to bring other people into situations, particularly if someone has already said, like, "Hey, I'm concerned about that. I've warned you about that." And so I feel like if I go to that person, it's going to be "I told you so" or judgment. And I'm not necessarily wanting to hear that. Maybe I think I can figure it out on my own. Maybe I think this person will change and they'll go back to the sweet, loving person who's very giving. I think that's one of the other reasons why we tend to normalize this, is because we've seen it growing up. You may have seen financial abuse growing up in your household. And so you may have seen that with your parents, where one leveraged financial resources over the other. There may have been one that primarily was the breadwinner. And so they basically got to control whatever happened in the family as that breadwinner. And so you got to see kind of the powerlessness that comes along with not being the person that is earning income or earning the most income, was able to be self-sufficient in the family. And so you may just think that that's a normal part of being in a relationship with people, is one person is going to have power or control because more of the financial resources. You'll also see people engaging in verbal abuse. That's a very common one. And physical abuse is the other very common one. So the name calling, the demeaning comments, the definitely will see people throw back in your face when they have information about your medical health, your mental health, like, "Oh, this is, why you have these issues. This is why you're freezing and fawning because you got trauma, or you got arthritis. This is why you can't get around and move. Nobody else will want you." You're depressing. It's not just that you're depressed, but you're also depressing. And so really painting this picture that you're handicapped, that you're inept, that you're inadequate, that you're damaged, that you're wounded, and that nobody else will want to deal with you. um, People will make negative comments about your body, your ability to do things around the house, your cooking, your house cleaning. I will never. I was just at a gospel concert this weekend, and the Clark sisters were there, and just I will never forget that line in their the Clark sisters story where the father says to the mom, like, you're worthless, you are useless, and just how that sat. Those kind of things can really sit in your spirit and can make you really feel powerless to be able to do anything or leave. Like, a lot of people are afraid, and so when they're in these situations of intimate partner violence, like afraid of what this person may do to them. I've had parents in this situation as well where their kids were extremely violent. They may have had rage disorders. They may be on substances, and so well, they need to get out of my house, but I'm afraid if I try to put them out, they'll try to kill me, or they'll come back and they'll kill me, and they'll kill their siblings, and they'll kill their grandparents because the kids have made these threats. And so that's also part of that control too, and holding someone hostage, is that literally you know that this person could absolutely do these things that they're telling you that they will, and sometimes you've seen them do it. We saw um, Sean Combs dragging Cassie, kicking Cassie, beating Cassie. There's a lot of witness reports that that has happened. And so people have seen the violence, and they've seen you do it in front of other people. And so they know that these other people aren't going to protect them and save them either. And so you feel trapped, you feel stuck. And a lot of times we can be really judgmental of people, like, oh, you're an adult, you put yourself in that situation, not understanding the powerlessness that comes along with this. And again, that grooming piece of what did I learn from childhood, and fully understanding how trauma affects the body, that fight, flight, fawn, freeze, where sometimes you just don't feel like there's anything you can do, or that you try to do whatever you can to get the least amount of harm inflicted on you. You'll see a lot of people kind of duck and cover. You saw that in the video with Cassie. It's like, let me just kind of get through this, because if I try to fight back, it's just going to be worse. So if I just go ahead and let them do what they're going to do, and get it out of their system, then we can kind of move on to that honeymoon phase that often comes after. When people are abusive, they tend to do some nice gesture afterwards, some big grand gesture. And so you learn to navigate that, because the person who is doing this to you is oftentimes also your protector, also your financer, also the person who has been able to support you and get you out of situations and give you opportunities, and has been able to lift you up. Maybe they got you out of a violent situation you were in with your own parents. And so you're looking at them in this light of like, oh, this person is also kind of like my savior as well. And so we'll understand that there's an allegiance to them. And particularly what people will do also with the mental manipulation is remind you of what they brought you out of, tell you all of the things that happened to them. They may have a trauma background or other things that they've dealt with. And so you feel sorry for them, and you empathize with them, and you want to protect them, and you want to be that person that's there for them because other people abandon them and leave them, and they'll say, yo, you're just going to leave me too, right? And that's part of that emotional abuse that goes along. And sometimes what people will do with that is they'll withhold affection, they'll hold grudges, they'll be dismissive of what you say. They'll threaten to leave you or spend time with other people because they'll say it's your fault, you're doing this, you brought this on yourself. And so they're exploiting kind of our insecurities and our vulnerabilities. They attack our character. And so it just keeps us feeling powerless. And that is one of the tricks for the abuser, is you need to be powerless in order for me to be able to have control over you. When you heard back in the era of sexual workers, when there were pimps, the pimps would say they would always have to strip the person down first. They'd have to beat them down, strip them down in order to create who they wanted to have as a sex worker. And so the same thing applies in this situation, is people will want to strip you down so that you don't have any kind of fight. You don't have any worth. You don't have a foundation. So it's much easier to manipulate you. Sexual abuse, which is also some of the allegations against Sean Combs as well. Forcing people to engage in sexual behavior, things that make them uncomfortable, filming them without their consent or without their comfort, sharing what you filmed. And that's part of it as well, is that there were videos, and those videos were used to blackmail people into continuing to engage in behaviors. using drugs in order to keep people in that state of being submissive and controlled, using money, threatening. We'll see people in relationships. I'll threaten to cheat on you if you don't do these things that I want you to do. Then I'm gonna go find somebody that will. I've also heard, as my marital spouse, you're obligated to do this. This is what you're supposed to do. It doesn't matter if you don't like it or it's uncomfortable. You're supposed to do it anyway. So I see a lot of that kind of manipulation as a part of it. Also, isolating people from who they love in places where they may be supported, and particularly painting a picture of these folks so that you put distance in between, create chaos, not allow the people to come to your house, say they've done something to you, and that your partner, if they love or care about you, your sister, your brother, your friend, they love and care about you, they also won't engage with this person who has done something to you. We've also seen stalking. Michael Ealy, unfortunately, is probably typecast a little bit in his persona to be able to stalk and be violent in relationships, but following, wanting to see where you are. You see people having to have their phone and turn it around because they're on the phone with a partner or a family member who wants to make sure that they're where they said they're going to be. Popping up on people's jobs, making sure they're at work, putting devices on their vehicles to track them, checking their gas. When they get home, like, I know how many miles it takes you to get to work, and you should still have this amount of gas on the way there and on the way back. People go and run errands, then they're questioned about, where'd you go running this errand? You just really cheating, you were doing something else. And then also that fear that people will leave them. And so there's constantly the monitoring and checking of bank accounts and checking of bags. People will check your clothes, smell you. Let me make sure you haven't been with someone else. We've unfortunately seen parents do that with their children, where they'll have these checks. Let me see if you're still a virgin. Let me check your underwear. These kind of things is abuse as well. And again, this primes you to later be in relationships with other people who are abusive because that's what you've grown up with. Of course, now we're in the age where it can be digital. And so that cyberbullying, excessive texts or calls where people, you have seen people leave, have called 100 times. They've left 30 messages. They can't even leave any messages anymore. They'll text paragraphs, and that could be violent statements, demeaning statements. It could be things like monitoring what you're doing on the internet. It could be revenge porn, sharing pictures of sexual behaviors that you've engaged in and you might have consented to, but not for them to be shared with other people, to try to make you look bad or try to spin you in this negative way. There's also the spiritual abuse, where you can mock a person's religious beliefs, try to prevent them from engaging in their faith based institutions, only saying they can engage with certain people and cutting them off to other people, particularly people who may express to them, like, hey, that's not actually something that's in doctrine. Like, where are you getting that from? Like, that is, those are things that people are taking out of context and using to try to keep you manipulated. So, this is what we know about cults, right? We don't want people outside of the cult to have influence, because then you'll start thinking about things in a different way, and that can interfere because now you're engaging in some critical thinking that can be very dangerous to the person who's trying to keep you controlled. We also have child abuse, so adverse childhood experiences, physical and sexual abuse in childhood, neglect, verbal and emotional abuse. We're learning more about when you don't have loving relationships with your parents, even if they weren't mean to you and they didn't exploit you, they didn't pimp you out, sexually exploit you growing up, but they just weren't emotionally present and attentive and engaging and aware. And so that can stunt you as well. And so you have this wound where you're looking for people to love you and connect with you and validate you. And so you end up going to people who can be abusive to you because they know that that's your wound and they're going to exploit that need. Um, but we do know that there are people that experience neglect where they don't get their basic needs provided for, where they're in harmful situations. We mentioned the sexual exploitation people, but also not allowing them to get good medical care, not being responsive to them when they come and say, like, hey, for example, for a young lady, my menstrual cycle has started. Well, you need to figure that out, right? So now you're in a position where you have to try to get your own resources and your own kind of personal care items, which means you're much more likely to go to someone who can offer those things to you. So, recognizing that these things are foundational, it is important for us to be able to then think about some of the other factors that could influence why we end up being in these positions where this type of abuse doesn't necessarily register with us. We've mentioned substance abuse, mental illness can play in there, instability. So if you don't have security, and that's what a lot of times you'll find that, and this is the grooming kind of priming component, is that people will play on like, hey, I'll get you housing, I'll get you clothing, all of the things that you weren't able to have because maybe your family didn't give them to you, or financially you're just not in a good place, so they provide that stability for you. They set you up to be codependent, and a lot of times we're already coming from instances where we don't feel like we have worth unless we're in a relationship anyway. So that kind of sets us up to be more codependent as we continue to matriculate through our lives. We can have a lot of guilt and shame that keeps us in a place because we don't want people to know what exactly we're struggling with or what we've dealt with in a relationship with someone. There's that, again, obligation that we feel toward this person that sometimes will keep us in that space of just, you want someone to be better. I tell people that we love a person for who they can be instead of recognizing who they are. Sometimes we have children and we're protecting them because we recognize, like, if I'm not here to be a buffer for you and something is going to happen, and I do know that this person is a better position to be able to get custody of you, so I have to stay in order to protect you. Sometimes we're a part of faith-based institutions that don't believe in divorce, that don't believe in separation, and so we don't want to necessarily be ostracized from our faith-based communities, so we stay. So, what I want to kind of leave you all with is, when you are in a situation, if you're experiencing intimate partner violence or you know someone else that is experiencing it, um, one, I think it's important to understand that it is abuse, not to minimize it, not to dismiss it, not to kind of justify it and be overly responsible for, like, why I caused this, and be able to understand who this person is and how they've been treating you, and then what you deserve. And I do think, of course, therapy, here's your plug for it, right? It can help you navigate that. Sometimes you have to be very mindful if you're in a relationship with somebody, in a family with someone who doesn't believe in therapy, because they know that that is another way for you, them not have to have control over you. So you have to be really careful about that. We, of course, want you to be safe. I think that you always have to have a safety plan. And so sometimes we need help doing that and being able to identify the support resources that they have. And also, like, as people who may be on the outside looking in, like, let's be really mindful that unfortunately we tend to do a lot of victim blaming and not put the responsibility on the person that is the abuser. So regardless of someone staying, like, we'll say they're stupid or that's your fault for continuing to put up with that and not really understanding the cycle that led there. And so withholding that judgment and just offering that support to people. And that doesn't mean that you necessarily have to be the place that they come for shelter or that emotional respite, but that you understand what resources are out there, and that you're able to kind of talk to them about ways to navigate it. So, what are those resources? Hope Harbor, of course, here in Columbus, Georgia, but there's a national domestic violence hotline. There's domesticshelters.org, Love and Respect, which is a phone number. You can just literally text "Love Is" to 22522. And that website is loveisrespect.org. That has a lot of good resources. And I think it's important for us to just know that we have a lifeline, that we deserve to be in safe and loving relationships, that us accommodating people who are violent toward us or who are engaging in abusive behaviors toward us doesn't actually stop them from being abusive, doesn't stop them from attempting to control us and manipulate us. All it literally does is just give us more opportunities to be abused, and it also continues to kind of normalize, and our threshold changes, right? Like, we always say, like, oh, I would never put up with this, but then your threshold changes over time and you're like, right, I didn't realize I was being groomed this time, primed during this time with this person to accept more of these behaviors. So it is never too late to be able to leave a relationship, and you don't have to do it by yourself. You're enough, you're worthy, you're loved, and you deserve to be in loving relationships with people. Okay, be well.